My name is Freya, and I'm about to turn 25 this year. I've been happily married for 4 years, and my son, William, just celebrated his fourth birthday. When I first got married, I worked full-time, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband, Henry, is 27 years older than me. Our relationship started with Henry being the one to pursue me passionately, but after we got married, I noticed a shift in his attitude, where he became more controlling. Henry has a sister, Aria, who is 23 years old. There's a bit of an age gap between them, and it seems that Henry tends to spoil her a little. Before we got married, I didn't mind Aria visiting often. I thought it was just a normal sibling bond, and I assumed they got along well. But after we tied the knot, I started noticing some changes in Aria's behavior. She began showing up at our place without calling first, expecting to be treated like a guest without ever offering to help or show any appreciation. What bothered me more was Freya's response. Instead of addressing the situation with Aria, he would expect me to accommodate her every time. Aria would come in, barely acknowledging me, and just casually say to Henry, "Hey, I'm here again," like it was completely normal. Even though I wasn't prepared to host another guest, I ended up serving dinner to her. Henry, instead of understanding the situation, would blame me out loud, saying I should have been more considerate. Aria would apologize, but it was clear she enjoyed Henry's favoritism. After dinner, while Henry and Aria sat chatting on the sofa, I was left with the leftovers. I had to make my own meal, and they didn't even acknowledge me or William. It felt like we were just there to serve them, not treated as family. One evening, as I was about to take a bath with William, Henry loudly interrupted, asking me to go buy a cake for Aria, even though it was already late. Aria insisted she wanted it right away, and Henry blamed me for the delay. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly agreed to go to the cake shop with William. As we walked, I overheard them criticizing me, calling me inconsiderate, and questioning why Henry even married me. Although William didn't understand the conversation, he could feel the tension between Henry and me. Trying to keep things light, I asked him what kind of cake he wanted, and he happily responded that he wanted one with lots of fruit. Our trip to the cake shop was full of cake talk, which for a moment helped me forget about the negative things Henry had said earlier. We made it to the shop just before closing time and managed to find the cake Aria wanted. We also bought the fruit cake that William had asked for. When we got home, I served the cakes to Henry and Aria, and then I made William's cake and took it to the dining room. The moment I placed his cake in front of him, Aria pointed at it and said she wanted that one. Before I could say anything, Henry moved William's cake in front of Aria, ignoring William's protests. Henry justified his action by saying he had paid for the cakes with his own money, so he had the right to choose for William. I couldn't hold my feelings in anymore. I told Henry how unfair it was, and in response, he threatened divorce. William, who had stopped crying, nervously grabbed my hand. After a moment, he said, "Mom, I also like cake with strawberries on it." It's really good, as he ate the cake Aria had wanted. Seeing that William was going through so much, I decided to take him away from the situation. I moved him to another room, so he could enjoy his cake peacefully. Henry apologized to Aria, saying he was sorry for being so stingy, but I held back, not wanting to argue in front of William. Watching William enjoy his cake, so happy and innocent, brought me some comfort. After we finished the cakes, we decided to take a late bath and sleep in William's bed. The next morning, when I was preparing breakfast, I realized Aria had already left. But soon, I heard William crying. To my shock, I found that his piggy bank, a gift from my father, had been broken and all the money he had saved was gone. William, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was heartbroken. When I asked Henry about it, he casually explained that Aria needed some money, so she had taken it from the piggy bank. Holding my crying, shaking son, I felt his pain so deeply that I couldn't help but cry with him. It hurt to see how much Henry was focused on taking care of his sister, Aria, over our own son. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I was angry and sad, so I confronted Henry, breaking my usual habit of staying silent during arguments, especially in front of William. Without saying a word, Henry walked into the bedroom and returned holding something shocking: divorce papers. I was stunned to find that Henry had been secretly hiding divorce papers, something I had no idea about. In an outburst, he shoved the papers at me and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. William, who had never cried about the issues between Henry and Arya before, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He cried non-stop since last night, and it broke my heart to see him like this. Feeling the weight of the situation, I suggested that we skip daycare for the day. To my surprise, William happily agreed, with a faint smile on his face. We spent the day together playing and bonding. William brought a picture book from the shelf, climbed onto my lap, and happily pointed to the teacher in the book, saying, "Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed full of patience, and in that moment, I decided to make the day special. I took a day off from work, despite the possible trouble it might cause at my job. My workplace understood the situation and kindly granted me the day off. We spent the morning at the park, playing hide and seek, having fun in the sandbox, and sliding down the slides. When we got back home for lunch, William looked sleepy. Normally, he would nap on his own, but today he fell asleep in my lap, just like when he was a baby. I had planned to use the time to do some household chores, but today felt different. Instead of cleaning, I decided to enjoy the peaceful moment and let myself be healed by the sight of William's calm, sleeping face and gentle breathing. Just as I was settling into this serene moment, I heard a noise from the front entrance. The door had opened, and since it wasn't the usual time for Henry to come home, I became suspicious. I quickly hid in the bedroom closet, holding William tightly. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise, it was Arya. I listened as she moved through the house, sounding frustrated as she searched for something. After a while, she made a phone call, mentioning Henry and talking about their failed search. I could hear her locking the front door as she left. Once I felt it was safe, I put William back to bed and sat down to think about what had just happened. I couldn't understand why Arya had entered our house, or what they had been looking for. Suddenly, Henry felt like a stranger to me, and I was filled with disgust and fear. Quickly, I packed some essentials for William and me and headed to the train station. We took a train to my parents' house, which was thankfully just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, they could tell something was wrong just by looking at my face. They welcomed us without asking questions. Once we were settled, I told my parents everything about Henry, Arya, and the strange things that had been happening. I explained how I didn't feel safe staying at our house anymore. My mother suggested that Arya might have been searching for my belongings, possibly cash cards. As I thought about it, I recalled my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. When I got married, I handed over the business to trusted friends so I could focus on raising my child. Though I still worked part-time and kept in touch with the company, Henry had no idea that I was still the CEO. I remembered the divorce papers Henry had hidden, and I began to suspect that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. Although I had told him that I still received some money from the company, I had kept the details of my savings and my role as CEO private. Over time, I realized that Henry struggles with managing money and tends to spend all that he earns. Early in our marriage, Henry only gave me $200 a month for food, and even suggested that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. But with the financial strain of raising William and barely having enough for food, I never agreed to stay home. Eventually, Henry reluctantly allowed me to work part-time. To keep him from asking for more money, I signed a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer, and since William was born, I've used my savings to cover his nursery fees and buy him clothes. Even though I only received $200 for food, I never asked Henry for more money. He must have assumed I had savings, especially considering Arya's apparent need for money. I also thought they might have been looking for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account for William, into which a portion of my salary is deposited every month. But I always carry my valuables with me, so they won't find anything if they were searching for it. What was even more troubling was the idea that Arya might be coming into our house when we weren't there, and Henry might be letting her. My father suggested that I store my valuables, including the cash cards, in their safe for now. As I thought about their need for money, William came over to my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the promise he had made to save money. My father, furious about what had happened to William's piggy bank, vowed to call Henry. My mother suggested that I try to figure out what Henry and Arya were after. She pointed out that Henry might try to shift the blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him. I decided to act calmly and find out what their true intentions were. I planned to secretly record their conversation. My father's lawyer friend also offered to help. When we returned home, I started cooking dinner while keeping my phone screen down, ready to record. It wasn't long before Henry arrived home, and to my surprise, he immediately asked about my cash cards. When I asked him about it, he gave vague answers, clearly trying to deceive me. When I remained silent, Henry grew more agitated. He demanded that I give him all of my part-time earnings for his sister. I refused and calmly explained that the money was for William's savings. In response, Henry angrily shoved the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for William. He even said something that made my heart drop. He valued Arya more than our own son. Hearing this, I couldn't continue preparing the meal. I stopped, put the divorce papers in my bag, took William's hand, and walked toward the door. Henry shouted loudly, stating his serious intent for the divorce and ordering me never to come back. I responded firmly, telling him I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. Once we left, Henry bombarded me with messages and calls, which I ignored. I turned off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. I shared the recording of our conversation and the divorce papers with them. Although I had no love or affection left for Henry, I couldn't stop worrying about how this would affect William. My parents understood my concerns and advised me to do what I felt was best. They acknowledged that a divorce could be emotionally hard on William, but they also supported my decision. As I was grappling with the decision, William told me he was hungry. My mother, seeing the distress on my face, kindly made hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overcome with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother lovingly told William that the hamburgers were made so that he and I could visit her whenever we wanted. William eagerly took a bite and joyfully exclaimed, "Grand's hamburgers. I want to eat these every day." I smiled and said, "It's because the hamburgers are filled with the love I have for you." Then, in a sweet gesture, William took a big bite of his hamburger and offered it to me. His kindness broke me, and even though I tried to stop my tears, they kept flowing. Noticing my tears, my father reassured William that they were tears of happiness, not sadness. William, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red. I realized how blessed we were to be together as a family. I looked at William and remarked, "Family is precious." Surprised, William asked, "Did Dad say that only Arya is family?" My father gently confirmed it but then asked, "Would you like to live with us as family?" With a joyful laugh, William eagerly agreed, which made everyone smile. Despite still grappling with the idea of divorce, the meal was so warm and filled with love that I finally decided to part ways with Henry. I planned to tell William about it, even though my heart felt heavy. Yet somehow, I sensed that William already understood, even without me saying a word. The situation gradually settled, and William, in his innocence, expressed a desire to live as a family. He even embraced our pet dog, affectionately calling him his younger brother, despite the dog being older than him. His sweet gesture lightened the mood, and it felt like a small moment of joy amidst the turmoil. With my decision made, preparations for the divorce began in earnest. I contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's, and together, we started formalizing the contract. The next day, we signed the necessary papers, and while I took in the weight of what was happening, my father and William shared comforting laughter in the other room. They were trying to lift my spirits, but I was still processing everything. As I lay in bed that night, I found myself reminiscing about my childhood, when life was simpler, and I never imagined I'd be facing such a complicated, painful decision. The following day, I checked my smartphone and found over 200 missed calls and messages from Henry. His emotional instability was evident in every message. I felt exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, and I decided to turn off my phone to avoid hearing more. With the lawyer's help, we explained everything to my parents. We shared how Arya had accumulated a significant amount of debt due to her casino habits and shopping addiction, and how Henry had acted as her guarantor. It was becoming clearer why he had been acting so erratically. They had been planning to use my savings to cover Arya's debts, and it explained so much about his recent behavior. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted. Henry was devastated when he realized it was final, and I could hear him sobbing on the other end of the phone. It was strange, his tears didn't move me. After everything that had happened, I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for him. Despite the expectation of disagreements over child support, Henry agreed to sign a pledge to pay $340 every month for William's care. It was an amount that barely covered the essentials, but it was a small victory. Later, I received another call from Henry. His tone was different this time. There was no aggression. Instead, he calmly admitted to having manipulated me financially and explained his complex feelings toward Arya. He acknowledged his mistakes, but said nothing that could change my mind. I firmly stated that I had made my decision and wouldn't reconsider. I could hear his faint sobbing on the other end before he wished me happiness and hung up. I didn't even respond. As the call ended, I stayed strong, feeling a sense of resolve that I hadn't felt in months. I discussed my future plans with my parents. After much thought, I decided to stay with them until William grew up, giving us both the stability we needed. I resumed my role as the company president, something I had put on hold when Henry and I got married. I was determined to rebuild my life, not just for me, but for William as well. As time went on, I learned that Henry and Arya had informed their parents about the divorce and the mounting debts. The news was so shocking that it led to their disownment. For Henry, it was the final straw. His own family turned their back on him, leaving him to deal with the consequences of his actions. Looking back now, I find happiness in being with my family. We have our ups and downs, of course, but we have each other. I've come to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly care, who lift you up when you're at your lowest, and who help you see the light at the end of the tunnel. I have William, my parents, and my own strength to carry me forward. In the end, that's what truly matters.